I had an abortion on the day I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. My husband lied to me saying that he was on a business trip. In fact, he and his first love were staying in the ward next to mine. Richard, by the time the divorce agreement reaches you, I may already be dead. My only request is that I hope you won't come to pay your respects to me after I die. Because I don't love you anymore. On the day I confirmed my pregnancy, I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. It turned out that the recent frequent stomachaches and vomiting were not just because of the baby. On the day the diagnosis report came out, I sat on the chair outside in a daze. I couldn't keep the baby. My chat record with Richard still stopped a week ago. Me, husband, I've been feeling uncomfortable in my stomach recently. When can you come back? He had been on a business trip for a week, saying that he was going to meet a big client. And Xiao Yu sent me a message, sister lend me brother-in-law for another week. The divorce lawsuit is so difficult. He's a professional, and I only trust him. I believe my dear sister won't mind. There was also a video attached to the message. In the video, Richard rolled up his sleeves and was holding a bowl of porridge. He looked at the camera helplessly. Stop filming. Eat properly. Don't complain about the bitterness of the medicine when you have a stomachache again later. Richard always had infinite tolerance, helplessness, and doting towards Xiao Yu. No, it should be said that everyone showed such preference and indulgence towards Xiao Yu. Including my parents. Xiao Yu came to my home when she was 8 years old. She was adopted by my parents. She had been pretty since she was a little girl, lively, carefree, and full of vitality. While I didn't like to talk much, was introverted and shy, had an ordinary personality, and didn't have much presence. If Xiao Yu was a bright rose, then I was a dandelion hidden deep in the grass. She was flamboyant and bright, while I was reserved and silent. Since childhood, Xiao Yu had always taken away everything I had in an extremely aboveboard way. Dad's sister's shoes are nicer. I want to wear them. Mom, please give me that blue dress. My parents would always put on a symbolic show of hesitation and symbolically ask for my opinion. I would silently nod in agreement, and they would praise me for being sensible. If I refused, they would say, "You're the older sister. You should give in to your younger sister a little. Xiao Yu isn't our biological daughter. She's psychologically fragile and sensitive. We should be nicer to her." Irene, Mom and Dad believe you'll understand, right? I didn't want to understand, but I didn't want to make my parents feel embarrassed either. I always knew that only the crying child would get the candy, but my mother had always suffered from migraines, and my father was so busy with work. I didn't want to make them upset just because of a pair of shoes or a dress. When I was in high school, Xiao Yu found out that I wrote in my diary that I liked Richard. She said with a laugh, "Half of the girls in the school like Richard. There's nothing to be shy about." But what's so good about Richard? He has a bad temper and always acts so arrogantly. I don't understand why you all like him. Xiao Yu said that she would help me chase Richard and play matchmaker for us. On the basketball court, she hooked Richard's shoulder and said that she wanted to learn to play basketball from him. I sat on the side and watched their school bags for them. After that, Richard pretended to kick Xiao Yu. "You're so bad at it but still love to play. You even hugged the basketball and ran forward when you fouled. I'm a girl. How would I know the basketball rules?" Xiao Yu hugged me and acted coquettishly. "I'm not as good as my sister. She knows so much about NBA and CBA. Oh, I'm just so stupid. Stinky Richard, you still dislike me. I could understand basketball games. The basic moves like the 3-step layup and walking violations were clear to me. Richard liked basketball so much and respected the rules the most. However, he just smiled and watched Xiao Yu running around the court with the basketball in her arms. He held her waist to help her shoot. So, it turns out that when you like someone, you can allow her to break the rules. In sophomore year of college, Richard formally confessed his love to Xiao Yu. He had prepared for half a year and bought a diamond ring. Xiao Yu cried and said, "Richard, I can't be with you. My sister likes you. If I'm with you, I'll be too sorry for her. You know I'm adopted. I can't be sorry to anyone, especially not to my sister. I don't give a damn whether she likes me or not." Richard looked at me angrily. "Irene, did I ask you to like me? Or does it mean that just because you like me, I have to be labeled with you for the rest of my life and be doomed to be alone forever?" That was the first time I saw Richard so angry. His eyes were red, and he was in so much pain that he almost tore the whole night apart. "Xiao Yu, you didn't want to be with Richard, but you had been ambiguous with him for so many years. You shared a straw when drinking milk tea, used the same pair of chopsticks when eating, and walked around arm in arm with him ostentatiously. When others asked her, she always said that she and Richard were just friends. However, when Richard kissed her when he was drunk, she never pushed him away. After that night, Xiao Yu went abroad. Our family couldn't afford the cost of her studying abroad at all. It was her senior in the same major who paid for it. Later, Richard drank until he had stomach bleeding, and I dragged him out of the drinking party and sent him to the hospital. After that, we got together. On our wedding day, Xiaoyu came back to China to attend my wedding. She wore a backless red dress, swaying gracefully, looking bright and charming. When toasting, her wine glass bumped into Richard's glass, and suddenly she burst into tears. Oh, I'm so sorry for losing my composure. I'm just so happy for my sister's big day. Xiaoyu drank up the wine in her glass, with tears glistening in her eyes. She wanted to drink more, but Richard took me to another table. After the dinner party, I saw Richard hugging Xiaoyu and crying, "Is it only by marrying her that you would come back to see me?" I was wearing a cheongsam and holding a cup of honey water to relieve the effects of alcohol, standing outside, feeling the night was as cold as water. I thought that even if Richard didn't love me 80%, he still loved me 50%. But it was all just what I thought. In love, the person who is self-righteous is the most pitiful. After Xiaoyu left, Richard and I didn't contact each other for a long time. I volunteered in a nursing home and got to know Richard's grandmother, and we became friends despite the age difference. When Richard and I met again, I realized that there was such a fate between us. At that time, he was busy working part-time jobs and studying. Later, he was busy striving for success and trying to make a name for himself in the city. I had a very good relationship with his grandmother. Thanks to this connection, Richard and I got closer and closer. When did our relationship develop? Maybe it was on that rainy night when he held an umbrella for me while half of his body got wet. Or perhaps it was on a certain late night when he bought Odin from the convenience store for me, and every item was what I liked to eat.
Antes de poder levantarme, vi a una mujer con una blusa floreada, con barro en los pies, irrumpir.
After graduating, Richard entered the legal profession and worked very hard. He drank with clients until he had stomach bleeding. His grandmother called me and asked me to take care of him. He was lying in the hospital, looking pale and tired. I took porridge to visit him and watched him finish eating in silence. Richard asked me, "Irene, do you still like me? What about you? Do you still like Xiaoyu?" I asked him back. He thought for a while and said, "It's all in the past." Since Richard said so, I believed him. We naturally fell in love, got married, and there were also sweet times. He bought me a 2-carat diamond ring and picked me up from work and sent me to work regardless of the weather. Even if there was a dinner party at night, he would definitely have dinner with me first before going out. On our wedding night, I said to him, "Richard, I heard what you said to Xiaoyu. If you married me just to see her again, then we can get divorced right now." I loved Richard deeply, but I couldn't be so humble as to abandon myself. Richard hugged me and explained for a long, long time. He said that he just took advantage of being drunk to let go of his past grudges. Richard said, "Irene, it won't happen again. Please forgive me. A man's word is like a lie." What a pity that I hadn't heard this golden saying at that time. In this relationship, Richard deceived himself as well as me. We had been in love for 2 years and married for 3 years, but it couldn't withstand Xiaoyu's one glance back. Richard brought Xiaoyu back to our home. At that time, I was sitting in the ward waiting for the abortion surgery. I told Richard that I would be on a business trip for a while, and he told me to be careful. During the time when Richard went to find Xiaoyu, I installed surveillance cameras at home. I had a cat named Fan, which was given to me by my fans. I loved it very much. I was very afraid that one day I would faint outside and no one would take care of Fan's life or death. After installing the surveillance cameras, I asked my aunt to come to feed Fan after I was hospitalized. "Ah, Richard. There's a cat." Xiaoyu screamed as soon as she entered the door, jumped into Richard's arms, and hooked his neck. Fan walked with cat steps, raised its neck, looked at Xiaoyu, and bared its teeth. "It's okay. Fan won't hurt you." Richard's expression froze for a moment, and then he quickly pushed Xiaoyu away. Xiaoyu lived in the second bedroom, saying that she would move out when she found a good place. She looked around every corner of the house as if she was inspecting her territory. Fan followed her, staring at her. Xiaoyu looked at Fan with contempt and didn't show the slightest fear at all. So? She had been pretending to be afraid of cats all these years just to stop my parents from letting me keep a cat. Xiaoyu was about to go to the kitchen. "Xiaoyu." Richard stopped Xiaoyu from using the kitchen, and his tone was a bit urgent, "Don't touch Irene's kitchen." I worked as a planner for a food show and also worked part-time as a food anchor. I really didn't like others to touch my kitchen, just like Richard didn't like others to enter his study. In this regard, we respected each other's living habits very much. Xiaoyu let out a very aggrieved "oh." But I knew that she would definitely touch my kitchen. Xiaoyu, she would constantly test Richard's bottom line and test my position in Richard's heart. When I saw her deliberately break the couple's cups that belonged to Richard and me, squat down and prick her hand, I wasn't the least bit surprised. Xiaoyu, she was just such a person. She could give up something, but she would never allow others to take it away. "Didn't I tell you? Don't go into the kitchen." Richard's expression was very unpleasant when he saw the broken cups. This pair of cups meant a lot to us. We bought them during our honeymoon trip in Europe. There were 2 cups, one tall and one short, one big and one small. When they were put together, they looked like a couple hugging. When hot water was poured into them at the same time, the cups that were close to each other would make a clear tinkling sound when they slightly bumped into each other. Once Richard made me angry, and I ignored him. He kept pouring hot water into the cups, and the tinkling sound was in my ears all night. Stop pouring. I couldn't help pushing him. You finally talked to me. Richard hugged me at once, bit my ear and said, "Honey, I'm sorry. I promise I'll never make you angry again." Since then, this pair of cups had become our way of apologizing. Richard, you don't care that my hand is bleeding, but you only care about a cup. Xiao Yu looked at Richard with a heartbroken look, tears streaming down her face continuously, as if she couldn't believe that Richard would treat her like this. She threw herself into Richard's arms and said painfully, "Are you still blaming me? I didn't want to torture each other back then, so I chose to go abroad. I'm just the adopted daughter of the Chiao family. I had to carefully please my sister, please mom and dad to get a little bit of love. What did I have to compete with her?" Richard stared at the broken cups on the ground and finally gently hugged Xiao Yu. "It's broken, just forget it. Don't cry." I looked at the 2 people hugging each other on my phone and said softly in my heart, "Richard, you're right. It's broken, just forget it." On the night when I was about to have an abortion surgery, the nurse asked me if I had any family members accompanying me. I said no. For a moment, there was a look of heartache on her face. She gently comforted me, saying that there were accompanying staff in the hospital and asked me to rest assured. I smiled at her. It said that the ultimate loneliness is having surgery alone, but I didn't think it was that bad. Loneliness had been a normal state for me. The baby was only 2 months old and was doomed not to be with me. Yesterday when I called my mother, I heard Xiao Yu's cheerful laughter on the other end of the phone. "Mom, come here quickly. This is so funny." Xiao Yu called her affectionately and joyfully. "Irene, Mom is going to watch TV first. Let's talk later." Mom hung up the phone in a hurry without giving me a chance to say anything. Actually, I had long been used to it. I'm not good at expressing myself and don't have Xiao Yu's tactfulness. She can always make our parents happy. Well, after I die, there will still be someone to accompany our parents, so they won't be too sad. While waiting in the ward, the little nurse chatted and joked with me to ease the atmosphere. "Sister Irene, I secretly took a photo in the next ward just now." The little nurse secretly showed me the photo and whispered, "Look, look. Such a handsome man and a beautiful woman. Aren't they a perfect match?" The man is extremely handsome and gentle. His wife seems to be pregnant. Her mood has been unstable and she's been crying all the time. Her husband has been hugging her to comfort her. In the photo, Richard was holding Xiao Yu with a gentle expression and affectionate eyes, as if he were cherishing his own treasure. I looked at it and smiled, nodding in agreement and saying, "They are quite a match indeed. But I think you're even more beautiful, Sister Irene. It's especially comfortable to be with you. Everyone in the nurses' station was eager to help you with the examination. Hee, I won the rock paper scissors this time." The little nurse was young and had a lively and lovely personality. "Irene?" A doctor in a white coat walked in, followed by several other doctors and nurses. He had a pair of very beautiful eyes. After taking off his mask, he revealed a very refined and handsome face. I was quite surprised. I didn't expect my attending doctor to be so young. He had been on a business trip out of town some time ago and he had been reviewing my medical records remotely. It said that he is the best local surgeon. In the past few days, the little nurse had comforted me, saying that although my situation was special, with Dr. Ethan performing the operation for me, I would surely recover. The little nurse was quite afraid of him and immediately stopped joking. Dr. Ethan looked at the medical record and said to the doctor beside him, "I'll go into the operating room with you." The other person seemed a bit surprised. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something. I lay on the bed and the little nurse pushed me out. When we were going out of the corner of my eye, I saw people from the next ward coming out. "Xiao Yu, don't cry. It's not good for the baby. The doctor said that if you don't keep this baby, it will be very difficult for you to get pregnant again in the future. I hope you'll think it over carefully." Richard's patient voice came over. He was coaxing Xiao Yu. I immediately became nervous, afraid that he would see me. I didn't want to experience such a chaotic scene in the final stage of my life. My husband was accompanying someone else in the hospital while I was pregnant with his child and about to have an abortion surgery. Then the news that I had an abortion and was suffering from stomach cancer and didn't have long to live would be known to everyone. Just thinking about such a scene made me feel terrified. The more you're afraid of something, the more likely it is to happen. Coincidentally, the little nurse pushing my bed slipped. My bed bumped into Richard. "Be careful." Dr. Ethan blocked Richard sideways. He grabbed the edge of the bed with one hand and pushed my bed away. I quietly grabbed the sheet and covered my face. "Richard, are you okay?" Xiao Yu's voice came faintly from behind. "What are you looking at? You're so distracted?" After entering the operating room, I suddenly became nervous. I felt cold all over. Tears kept flowing out, and I subconsciously touched my lower abdomen. After you recover, you can have another baby. Dr. Ethan stood beside me, looking down at me, speaking in a calm tone. I cried even harder. No, I wouldn't have another baby. But I'm going to die soon, Dr. Ethan. I'm so scared. I didn't know why I broke down like this at that moment. I couldn't control my emotions at all and was even shivering from the cold. Dr. Ethan stepped forward, firmly held my hand, and then wiped my tears with a disinfected towel. His hands were strong and warm. You won't die. As long as I perform the operation for you, you won't die. He looked into my eyes and said word by word, in the future, you'll have a happy family and a lovely child. Everyone will love you very, very much. I murmured, really? Will they only love me? Yes, only you. Dr. Ethan covered my eyes. All right, relax, relax. In a daze, it seemed that I had a gentle dream. In the dream, the person I loved only loved me. On the day after the operation, when I opened my eyes, I saw many missed calls on my mobile phone. In the WeChat chat box, there were all messages sent by Richard. Dear, when you come back from this business trip, let's have a baby. He took a photo, and apparently, he was shopping in a baby store. In one corner of the photo, Xiao Yu's arm was visible. Dear, are you busy with work? Why didn't you answer the phone? What's going on? You didn't reply to the messages or answer the phone. Are you angry? I've been a bit busy these days. How about we go on vacation together when you come back? One message after another, one missed call after another. Was Richard worried? I opened the home surveillance to take a look. Richard was pacing anxiously in the living room, constantly calling and sending messages to me. Xiao Yu walked over to comfort him. My sister isn't a child anymore. Maybe her phone is out of power. She's not that careless. Richard said a bit irritably. No matter how busy she is, she would always call me back immediately. I haven't been able to contact her at all since last night. Xiao Yu was startled by Richard's tone. She was stunned for a moment, pursed her lips, showing a bit of restraint. Richard, I found a new place to live. Xiao Yu said after a moment of silence. Richard looked at her for a while and said, okay, I'll help you move. Richard, are you angry with me and losing your temper with me now because Irene didn't answer your call? Xiao Yu was silent for a moment and then suddenly burst out. She sneered and said, are you going to tell me now that you love your wife madly and can't be away from her for a moment? What was that kiss last night all about? I was stunned when I heard this and quickly pulled up the surveillance record from last night to take a look. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Richard was still calling me. He must have had insomnia. There were wine glasses on the table. Richard was leaning on the sofa with his eyes closed. Xiao Yu was wearing a thin silk nightgown. She leaned over and gently kissed him. Richard responded to her naturally, and his movements were passionate. Richard, admit it. You still love me. Irene is just a substitute for me. Xiao Yu said to him. Richard suddenly opened his eyes, stared at Xiao Yu for half a second, and pushed her away. Looking so intently. I've called you 3 times. Dr. Ethan suddenly reached out and waved his hand in front of my eyes. He glanced at my mobile phone and paused slightly in his tone. Sorry, I didn't mean to pry into your privacy. I turned off the surveillance. For a moment, my mind went blank. In just a few seconds, it seemed that I thought a lot, yet it also seemed that I thought of nothing. There was an emotion slowly fading away. The pain was subtle and slow, just like unraveling silk from cocoons. Dr. Ethan, I'd like to be discharged from the hospital for a while and go home to pack my things. I looked up at Dr. Ethan and said softly, the thing I'm most worried about now is my cat. Its name is Fan. I want to go back and take it out and find a good home for it. The time for the next operation had been set. I needed to arrange my affairs and leave quietly. I'm a good option. You can entrust Fan to me for the time being. Dr. Ethan looked at his watch and said, coincidentally, I'm off work. I'll give you a ride. I felt a bit embarrassed for a moment and wanted to refuse. Dr. Ethan tapped his watch and said, Miss Chow, a doctor's time is very precious. 15 minutes. I'll wait for you in the underground garage. It's cold outside. Put on an extra coat. He walked away quickly without giving me a chance to refuse. The little nurse standing at the door was standing close to the wall. As soon as Dr. Ethan left, she slipped in. Sister Irene. Now the whole hospital is talking about it. Dr. Ethan likes you. The little nurse's face was flushed with excitement as she said excitedly, oh my God. The iron tree is blooming. The withered tree is coming back to life. The sun is rising from the west. So Dr. Ethan really likes women. I was stunned and quickly said, I've only met Dr. Ethan once. Shall we don't talk nonsense? The little nurse said very firmly, it's true. Dr. Ethan has never had any involvement with patients before. But last night after you fell asleep after the operation, he sat by your bedside all night. I happened to be on the night shift and took a peek. Dr. Ethan was like a stone statue waiting for his wife. He didn't do anything for 2 hours and just stared at you. If he doesn't like you, then you must owe him a huge amount of money. When getting into Dr. Ethan's car, I subconsciously went to the back seat. Dr. Ethan opened the door of the passenger seat for me. I don't have a girlfriend. Don't worry and just sit here. After he said that, thinking of Shalwi's words, I felt even more embarrassed and could only sit there silently. I felt extremely uncomfortable all the way. It would be so embarrassing to ask him bluntly if he liked me. I'd better pretend not to know. Shalwi, that big mouth didn't tell you that I watched over you in the ward last night? Dr. Ethan turned on the turn signal, stared ahead, and said casually. I felt my blood rush to my face. I'm really not good at dealing with such situations, and my hands and feet became a bit stiff. Dr. Ethan, thank you. I hesitated for a moment and said, thank you for your concern. Dr. Ethan turned his head and glanced at me. It seemed that he gave a light chuckle. I didn't dare to look at him at all. Finally, when we arrived home, I immediately got out of the car. Miss Chow, I'll wait for you in the car. Just put Fanfan here. Dr. Ethan handed me a cat carrier. I was stunned. Fanfan had never been out before, and I hadn't prepared a cat carrier for it in a hurry. After returning home, unexpectedly, Richard was there. When he saw me, he was also stunned. He walked over with big steps and suddenly hugged me tightly. Dear, you're back. Why didn't you call me? I would have picked you up. Richard hugged me very tightly and then asked me, is your phone out of power? I've been calling you all the time. I gently broke free from Richard's embrace and took a few steps back. I'm okay. I had my phone on silent and didn't hear it. I felt a bit of stomach pain when I spoke. Richard stared at me and asked, why are you holding a cat carrier? Are you taking Fanfan out? Well, I'll be on a business trip for a long time this time and you're too busy. I'm going to ask Jiami to take care of Fanfan for a while. I avoided his eyes. Fanfan. I raised my voice and called out. Fanfan rushed out of my room all of a sudden. It excitedly jumped into my arms and kept licking me. All right, my baby. I was immediately amused by it and stroked its little head. I hadn't seen Richard for half a month. I thought that when we met again, I wouldn't be able to suppress my inner emotions. I would be in pain, question him, and lay out all the things about Xiaoyu. However, when I got home and saw Richard, I found that many things didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter that Richard had kissed Xiaoyu. It didn't matter whether Richard still had feelings for Xiaoyu in his heart either. Because in my heart, Richard was no longer important. I had already broken out of the cocoon of loving Richard and was going to fly away completely. Honey, you don't look well. Are you feeling unwell? Richard came over and put his arm around my shoulder and said in a low voice, you sent me a message before saying that your stomach was uncomfortable. Have you gone for a checkup? Otherwise tell Jiame to arrange for someone else to go on the business trip. Stomach discomfort? I was stunned for a moment. Did I mention this to Richard? I actually had no impression of it. It's okay. I avoided Richard's hand and planned to pack some necessary things. I also needed to take Fanfan's favorite little dolphin with me. However, Richard grabbed my arm and forced me to look at him. What's the matter? I looked at him, not knowing why Richard was pulling me so hard. Richard seemed to be suppressing some emotions. His chest heaved slightly before he said, Irene, I always feel that you've changed since you came back from this business trip. We need to talk. I couldn't help laughing and said, yes, I've changed. I don't love you anymore. Irene. Richard's voice suddenly rose, and he said with a gloomy face, no matter what you're angry about, we can talk about it, but don't say such joking words anymore. I thought Richard's logic was so strange. Why did not loving have to be a joke? Did Richard think that I would surely love him all my life? My stomach hurt even more, and I didn't want to get entangled with him. Suddenly, Richard's cell phone rang. He hesitated for a moment and then answered it. Richard. I'm bleeding a lot. I'm so scared. Xiaoyu's crying came from the phone, and Richard's face changed at once. Irene, I have an emergency. You stay at home and wait for me to come back. Richard hurriedly prepared to go out. Richard. I called out to stop him. Richard turned to look at me. I asked him, is one of your friends in trouble? Richard's movement of turning the doorknob paused slightly, and he quickly nodded and went out. I looked at the tightly closed door. Just like my tightly closed heart. Richard, I won't say goodbye to you. Because we will never see each other again in this life. On the day I left, my stomach hurt so much that I couldn't straighten up, and I even vomited blood. Fanfan was so scared that it kept nudging me with its head. With the last bit of my strength, I called Dr. Ethan. My condition had worsened. Dr. Ethan advanced the surgery time. Dr. Ethan, please ask someone to take Fanfan to be taken care of by my good friend. Dr. Ethan, there are 2 letters in the drawer of the table beside my bed. Please help me send them out. Dr. Ethan, thank you for liking me. I'm quite happy. I really like being liked by others. That day, I said a lot of things because I was afraid that if I didn't say some things, I would never have the chance. Irene, you can take care of Fanfan yourself after you recover. I'll send the letters. Don't worry. I'm happy that you like me. I've liked you for 4 years already. I was pushed into the operating room. The shadowless lamp shone on my eyes. The last thing I saw was Dr. Ethan's eyes. Dr. Ethan, I forgot to tell you that your eyes are really beautiful. It would be nice if you could smile more often. Since Irene went on the business trip, I had vaguely sensed that something was wrong. In the past, when she was on a business trip, she would always share the local delicious food and beautiful scenery with me. But this time when she went out, she didn't send me a single message. The latest one was, "Honey, I've been feeling stomach discomfort recently. When can you come back?" That was already a message from more than 2 months ago. At that time, I was by Xiao Yu's side, helping her with the divorce procedures. Her ex-husband was very domineering. Xiao Yu was all alone in that city, so I could only go to help her. However, when facing Irene, I don't know why, but I just told her that I was going to meet a client. She helped me pack my luggage. The temperature difference there is bigger than here. Be careful not to catch a cold. If you work late, go to sleep for a while. Don't drink coffee to force yourself to stay awake, or you'll have a headache when you wake up the next day. Irene always spoke gently and slowly. She did things in an orderly manner. She gave instructions neither too hurriedly nor too slowly but just right. That night, I told her that we might as well try to have a child. She hooked her arms around my neck and a faint blush appeared on her fair face, which was really beautiful. I went to see Xiao Yu. She was still as flamboyant and beautiful as before. When she saw me, she punched me in the chest and smiled and called me brother-in-law. I immediately felt uncomfortable and asked her to call me by my name. Xiao Yu's matter was much more troublesome than I had imagined. I stayed there for more than half a month before going back. After I went back, Xiao Yu had no place to live and wanted to go home with me. Coincidentally, Irene was on a business trip at that time, so I let Xiao Yu live in the second bedroom. I thought that before Irene came back, I could handle Xiao Yu's affairs. We could still be the same as before. But I didn't have the chance. From the moment I saw the surveillance camera at home, I knew I didn't have the chance. That day, I hurriedly sent Xiao Yu to the hospital and rushed back home. There was a pool of blood on the floor at the door, and the door was still open. All my strength was drained in an instant, and my chest felt so stuffy that I could hardly breathe. Many terrifying scenes flashed through my mind, and in each scene, there was Irene's voice asking me for help. It was at this time that the letter arrived. The courier stood at the door of my house and asked me hesitantly if I wanted him to call a doctor for me. I took the letter and opened it. It was a thin letter, a divorce agreement and a letter from Irene to me. "Richard, when you receive this letter, I may no longer be alive. However, Dr. Ethan said that with him around, I won't die. I also want to cherish hope and welcome my new life. I'm sorry to inform you in this way that we once had a child. The child was only 2 months old. I was diagnosed with stomach cancer and couldn't keep it. On the night of the operation, I had a dream. I dreamed of a little angel waving at me. When I woke up, I felt both happy and sad. Actually, you and it had met once. That night, you and Xiao Yu were in the ward next to mine. When I was pushed out by the doctor, I accidentally bumped into you." I read these lines over and over again. As I read, the handwriting suddenly became blurred. It turned out that the sudden palpitation in the hospital that night was the child reminding me to go and see Irene. But I didn't chase after her. Irene and that child just passed me by. It turned out that when Irene sent me a message at that time, she wanted to tell me about her pregnancy. She actually had stomach cancer. No wonder she didn't look well when I saw her that day. In this family, Irene only took Fanfan away. The only thing she cared about was Fanfan. Richard, during the 3 years of our marriage, I lived a very happy life and had no regrets. When you got your first litigation fee, you bought me a 2-carat diamond ring and hugged me and said that if we were down and out in the future, we could sell the ring. I'll always remember the smile on your face at that time. The diamond ring was left beside the pool of blood. Even after vomiting blood, Irene didn't forget to take off the ring and return it to me. Richard, when we were together, I clearly told you that I loved you. When we part, let's also say goodbye seriously. I don't love you anymore. I hope we'll take good care of ourselves in the future. A thin piece of paper with just a few words was all that Irene left for me. We had been in love for 2 years and married for 3 years. Before she left, she only left me such a short letter. Irene was like a gust of wind in my youth. When I was in high school, many boys had a crush on her. She was fair and gentle, and when she smiled, her eyes were like a pool of water. But at that time, I only had eyes for Xiao Yu and didn't notice Irene's beauty. Her beauty was understated, like a gust of wind that quietly occupied my heart. On the night Xiao Yu went abroad, I lost my temper with Irene. I thought it was her liking that pushed Xiao Yu away from me. Since then, we hadn't seen each other again. I sent a message to Irene to apologize and only then found that she had deleted my WeChat. Xiao Yu's going abroad hit me hard. I worked hard to make money. Grandma lived in a nursing home, and I could only visit her when I had time. The day I saw Irene again was a rainy night in the corridor of the nursing home. She was wearing a light blue dress, a very pale blue. When the wind blew, it looked like water ripples. Irene had her hair tied up in a high ponytail and was carrying a bucket of porridge. When she saw Grandma coming out of the room, a helpless and gentle smile appeared on her face. "Hey, I told you to wait for me in the room, but you just wouldn't listen." It turned out that she knew Grandma. I thought I would be like a lovesick saint, waiting for Xiao Yu unwaveringly all my life. But I didn't expect that I fell for Irene. We would meet in the nursing home every Friday afternoon. She always had all kinds of dresses. She wore a light green knee-length dress, showing a pair of very beautiful legs. She walked over under the bright sun with an umbrella, and there were still some beads of sweat on her forehead. "Sorry, I'm a little late." She put away the umbrella, stood on the steps, and looked up at me with her usual shy smile. "Grandma has a hard time in summer." I made some appetizing snacks for her. I took the lunchbox from her hand and watched the wind blow her hair onto my face. She was very embarrassed and quickly tied her hair up. There was a red string around her slender wrist. I vaguely remembered that she had been wearing it for many years. We spent 3 years like this quietly. Sometimes we had things to talk about, and sometimes we didn't. Irene had a very quiet personality. She would talk about the books she had recently read and the recipes she was interested in. When I mentioned my recent work, she would also give me some pertinent suggestions. In the first year after I started working, I drank so much with clients that I had stomach bleeding and was hospitalized. In the middle of the night, I was lying alone in the ward. I looked at the ceiling, and my mind was full of Irene's face. She would surely come to see me. Grandma would ask her to. Irene came. She was carrying porridge and told me not to eat too much and to follow the doctor's advice. I asked her, "Irene, do you still like me?" She tilted her head slightly and asked me, "Do you still like Xiao Yu?" From that moment on, I knew that Irene was a very proud girl. She was neither obsequious nor overbearing, neither bent nor broken, and remained calm in the face of honor or disgrace. She wouldn't be sad if she couldn't get something, but would just leave quietly. If she got it, she wouldn't seem overjoyed either. On our wedding night, I made a mistake. I still haven't figured out until now why I said those words to Xiao Yu back then. I married Irene clearly because I loved her, but I told Xiao Yu that I did it just to see her. Later, I thought back on my state of mind that night over and over again. To sum it up, there are times when people just act stupid. Irene said that because she loved me deeply, she would forgive me this time, and only this time. So when I went to see Xiao Yu, I didn't dare to let her know and had to hide it from her. I kept telling myself in my heart that nothing would happen between Xiao Yu and me. Xiao Yu didn't end up with me. Actually, I later realized that it was simply because I was a poor lad back then. So after I achieved success in my career, I couldn't wait to show off my abilities when she was down and out. When I saw Xiao Yu relying on me and begging me, my heart swelled like never before. The sense of fulfillment completely made up for the regret of loving Xiao Yu but not being able to be with her when I was young. Xiao Yu still had feelings for me and even seemed to be trying to seduce me in a rather subtle way. Over the years, I was no longer the impulsive young man I used to be and could see through her clumsy tricks. But I didn't expose her. I played along with her act and took the bait. I really wanted to know what expression she would have when she found out that there was a big loophole in the divorce agreement she signed and that she wouldn't get that huge alimony, and also when she learned that the baby had been aborted. And I, for this bit of vengefulness, sacrificed my own marriage and lost Irene, lost my wife. "Richard, Irene will never come back, will she?" My mother-in-law, with red and swollen eyes from crying, said painfully, "It's our fault. We neglected Irene." Mom and Dad, now that I've picked up the pen, I don't know what to say instead. I have stomach cancer and don't know if I can get through this. There are some things that if I don't say them now, I may never have the chance again. Actually, since I was a little kid, I knew that I wasn't a very likable child. I stuttered when I talked when I was little, which made you receive a lot of criticism behind your backs. Even during family gatherings, when I wanted to say something, Mom would cover it up by saying that I didn't like to talk and was shy. Gradually, I didn't like to talk either. I was too shy to express my feelings. Dad, you like those lively and lovely little girls very much. You always praised Linlin from the neighbor's family as being especially nice, but it was so hard for me to say, I love Dad, I love Mom. I'm sorry that I wasn't a child who could meet your expectations. When Xiaoyu came to our family, actually, I was quite happy. She could happily and easily say that she loved Mom and Dad. She would tell a lot of interesting stories and make you laugh. After she came, you both smiled a lot more. I remember that one day in junior high school, it was raining heavily. Dad went to pick up Xiao Yu and forgot about me. Actually, I was just standing under the corridor at that time, but I didn't call out to him. The rain stopped quickly, and I could take the bus home. It was just from that time that I learned not to have too many expectations. Dad, you're prone to frozen shoulder. Usually, sit less when watching TV and go out for a walk more often. Mom, when you have a migraine and don't feel well, you can smell the aromatherapy I made for you more often. I made it according to an ancient recipe, and it's still somewhat useful. There seem to be endless things to say. Maybe it's because I said too little in the past. Don't be sad, Mom and Dad. I love you. My mother-in-law covered her face and was sobbing uncontrollably. My father-in-law smoked and kept looking at that letter. It's best that Irene is dead. Xiaoyu suddenly took out a small camera from the table and threw it at my face, shouting hysterically, Richard. This is karma. You drove Irene away just to get back at me. Huh, she was watching behind this camera as you brought me home, as I broke your cups, as you called her, as you kissed me. I couldn't tell whether there was more pain or numbness in my heart. Xiaoyu, how can you say such things? Irene is your sister. My mother-in-law looked at Xiaoyu in disbelief. I've never regarded her as my sister. Xiaoyu no longer hid her true feelings and said sarcastically, you adopted me out of guilt. Didn't my father die because he was protecting Xiao Tianping? Do you think that by bringing me back from the countryside and giving me a home, you can cover up this truth? Xiaoyu's father was a comrade in arms of my father-in-law. When Xiaoyu was 6 years old, her father died accidentally during an outside mission. Xiaoyu was taken back by her uncle in the countryside and had a very hard life. It was said that when my father-in-law rushed over, she was just a little kid squatting in the yard washing clothes. I hate you all to the core. Since I don't have a father anymore, Irene shouldn't even think about getting your love. Xiaoyu sneered, you raised me just like raising a little pet, asking me to make you happy. But when it came to really giving something for me, you were reluctant to part with anything. In sophomore year of college, I wanted to study abroad. But you clearly had the money but didn't take it out for me. You privately discussed using that savings to buy a house for Irene. My father-in-law looked a bit tired after hearing Xiaoyu's words. After a while, my father-in-law said, Xiaoyu, it's true that your father died protecting me. But that mission went wrong because he took bribes and leaked secrets. To protect you, I never told you these things. Also, you only heard half of what your mom and I talked about. We did plan to use the money to buy a house, but the house would have both your and Irene's names on it. We're old and always thought about buying a house for you too so that you would have something to rely on even after getting married. What's the use of saying these things now? We don't even know if Irene is alive or dead. Where on earth is she? I touched the wedding ring on my hand and said slowly, she'll come back. I knew that if Irene was alive, she would come back. Because she needed to come back to get a divorce certificate with me. I finally walked through that long dark night and welcomed my own light. That day, I woke up to the sound of crying. My dear daughter. My baby Irene. Mom hasn't had a chance to see you yet. Darling, you must get well. How much you've suffered. No wonder you haven't updated for so long. It turns out you were sick. Whoa, Mom's heart aches so much. When you wake up, Mom will surely love you well. Mrs. Linda, Dr. Ethan's mother, turned out to be my fan, with the nickname 50 years of professionally ruining the kitchen. Since I started working as a food anchor, she had been supporting me all the time, often giving me tips and sending me pictures of the food she cooked. In the past 4 years, although I hadn't met Auntie in person, we had developed a deep affection. Auntie had been ranking first on the list of supporters for a long time and was jokingly called my mom fan by other fans. However, I had never shown my face. How did Auntie know it was me? Of course it was that disobedient son Ethan who recognized you. He recognized your hand. Auntie held my hand and pointed at the little red mole on my palm. Tisk tisk, I have to say that this disobedient son has a good eye. He recognized my precious daughter at once. From that day on, Auntie brought me meals every day and accompanied me to chat and read books in the hospital. When we chatted online before, I thought she was especially enthusiastic. When we actually met, she was far more enthusiastic than I had imagined. Oh my, you don't know that naughty boy Ethan. He likes you so much. 4 years ago, he always had insomnia and was in a very bad mental state. Later, when he happened to see me watching your live stream, he came over to watch. Since then, every time you had a live stream or uploaded a video, he would wait for it. Now look at his phone. It's full of your videos. He can only fall asleep at night when he hears your voice. If I hadn't known that you were married back then, I would definitely have asked this naughty boy to chase you. Auntie handed me the peeled apple and pretended to be pitiful. My precious daughter, look at it this way. Ethan is also quite pitiful. For 4 years, he hasn't found a girlfriend or even a boyfriend. He just falls asleep listening to your voice. Why don't you give him a chance? Before my surgery, Dr. Ethan clearly told me that he liked me. I couldn't continue to pretend to be stupid and keep him hanging. Doctor Ethan, we're not suitable. I'm still not divorced. You will be divorced eventually. The divorce agreement has already been sent out. Well, I had an abortion before, and I may not be able to have children in the future. I know. I was right there during the surgery. As for the fertility issue, I don't care whether we have children or not, but I remember that you really wanted a child. Don't worry. All your indicators are fine. If I'm okay too, we can have a child. Even if my stomach cancer surgery is successful, I may not live long. So I need to confess my feelings to you as soon as possible. Just live one day at a time." These words were heard clearly by Auntie, who was hiding at the door. She was so anxious that she stomped her feet at the door and was caught red-handed by Dr. Ethan. "You blockhead. You idiot. This disobedient son is first class at making me angry. How come when it comes to confessing his feelings to a girl, he talks so stupidly, without any brains, like a cold-blooded fool? He deserves to be single. He deserves to fail in his confession." Auntie was so angry that she ate 2 apples in one go before calming down. Dr. Ethan came to make the rounds and showed me a video of Fan by the way. The little guy was living a good life at Dr. Ethan's home, jumping around with Tong Tong all day long. Oh, I forgot to mention that Tong Tong is Fan's older sister. At first, I always thought that the cat was given to me by Aunt Linda. It was only later that I learned that it was given by Dr. Ethan. I named the kitten Fan, and he named the other one he kept Tong Tong. Together, they're the Fan-Tong combination. Fan-Tong. I think he's the real rice bucket. Aunt Linda rolled her eyes when talking about this. "You're usually so busy. When you finally managed to go online to chat with me, this disobedient son would snatch my phone. Anyway, he chatted with you for more than half of the time. Sometimes I was even afraid that he would do something immoral and become a male homewrecker." I couldn't help laughing, but it involved my wound, and the pain brought tears to my eyes. "Ms. Lee, is your son such a person without a moral bottom line?" Dr. Ethan glanced at Auntie, looking rather disdainful. Auntie immediately put her hands on her hips and sneered, "You have a bottom line. You have a bottom line when you don't sleep in the middle of the night to dig out my daughter's IP address, wanting to see where she lives, just like a pervert. If I hadn't woken you up, who knows what crazy things you would have done. You get drunk and just hold your phone to watch videos, like a lovesick fool." My face flushed when I heard that. I didn't expect that Dr. Ethan, who always looked so cold, had done such a thing. "I'm not that abnormal." Dr. Ethan thought for a moment and then said to me while looking at me, "I'm quite normal. Don't be afraid." No. I couldn't help touching my burning ears. What I said didn't make sense. It just sounded really strange. Dr. Ethan smiled. When he smiled, it was like the ice and snow melting and the stars falling. Dr. Ethan looked so good when he smiled. "It seems that I should listen to you and smile more often." Dr. Ethan flicked my forehead and then walked away. My ears became even hotter. So I actually said that sentence in the operating room that day. I stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. After handling the discharge procedures, Auntie took me home with her. Originally, I was supposed to just pick up Fan. I don't know how it ended up that I stayed there. "Stay here. You must stay. Where do you want to go as a patient, my dear girl? Listen to Mom and just stay here." Auntie hugged me tightly and wouldn't let go. "Auntie will cook for you, and you can guide me beside me." Her body was soft and fragrant, and I couldn't help stretching out my hands to hug her back. The house was big and decorated very warmly. On the first day, Auntie came back with a bunch of flowers in her arms and said excitedly, "I've always dreamed of having a daughter, going shopping with her, having beauty treatments, arranging flowers, and having tea together. It would be so wonderful. Oh my, what good fortune do I have to pick up a daughter for free?" As Auntie was talking, her eyes turned red. "You don't know. Every time I watched your videos, when I heard your voice, Auntie was thinking, which family's little fairy is this? Whose little girl is this? She speaks so gently. When I was really sad, just listening to your voice made me feel better. You have such beautiful hands. Watching you cut vegetables and cook is really a pleasure to the eye." What excessive flattery. Dr. Ethan poured cold water on it. "Ms. Lee, your pot is going to burn." Auntie screamed and rushed to the kitchen. Dr. Ethan walked over, sat beside me, and helped me pick out the flower branches. My father passed away 4 years ago. When he was alive, he doted on my mother so much that she hardly ever did any housework. At that time, she was in a very bad state. Since she saw your videos, she started learning to cook from you. Whenever she was free, she would chat with you. She said that you spoke very gently, just like my father, and you must be a very gentle person. Auntie is really cute. She always spends money on me. I'm especially embarrassed. During that period, I turned off the rewards and gifts, and she was unhappy. She sent me private messages, saying that she would be depressed if she couldn't spend money on me. I raised my hand to pick up a flower and accidentally got pricked by a thorn. It was just a small matter, but Dr. Ethan held my wrist and looked at it carefully. He frowned. "Don't move. I'll cut them. I'll remove the thorns on the flowers before you arrange them. It's okay. It just stings a little." I shrank my hand back. Dr. Ethan quickly let go of me and said while looking at me, "It does matter. I think it hurts." My ears started to burn again, and I was at a loss for words, not knowing how to reply. When I was with Richard, he would never say such things. And I'm not good at expressing myself. We hardly ever said sweet words to each other. But since I met Dr. Ethan, I didn't know how to respond to what he said. Do you have any plans for the future? Dr. Ethan suddenly asked me. I was silent for a while before saying, I want to move to another city. I wanted to leave here and start a different life. After the operation, I couldn't do many tiring jobs anymore. Like the food planning job that required frequent business trips before, I couldn't continue doing it. Although Jiami said that I could go back to her company after I recovered, I didn't want to go back either. I have some savings. If I continue to be a food anchor, I can also earn some money and have no problem making a living. Have you ever thought about going abroad for a while? Dr. Ethan handed me a rose and said while looking into my eyes, I remember you mentioned before that you wanted to study in the United States. I had mentioned it casually in a live broadcast a long time ago. I didn't expect that he still remembered it. I studied art history in college and had always wanted to go to the United States for postgraduate studies. In my sophomore year, Xiaoyu went to study in the United States, and I was quite envious at that time. I'm afraid that I won't be able to pass the exams. I hesitated. Then go there first and take your time to prepare for the exams. Dr. Ethan put the flower in my hand. I'm going for further studies for a few years. We can go together. I looked up at him. He was also looking at me. Dr. Ethan, I've noticed that you always like to look into my eyes when you talk. I clenched the rose tightly. Dr. Ethan smiled again. Because then I can see myself in your eyes. Moreover. Dr. Ethan laughed even more. I've noticed that you like my eyes very much. When I first met you, I was wearing a mask, but you looked at my eyes several times. Before the operation when you were under anesthesia, you also praised my eyes for being beautiful. Every time I look straight at you, your ears turn red. My ears were burning hot and they must have turned red again. Although what he said was the truth, I didn't want to admit it. In the 3rd year after Irene left me, I met her in the United States. During these 3 years, she had never contacted me from the beginning to the end. She only called my parents-in-law occasionally. Since she left, I hadn't had a good night's sleep. I tried my best to numb myself with work. After getting drunk late at night, there was never a bowl of hot porridge or a cup of warm water waiting for me. In the cabinet in the storage room at home, there had never been any new tableware added. Irene liked buying tableware and tea sets very much. Every time she saw something she liked, she would be very hesitant. Richard, I can't buy both. I'll just buy this one. She reluctantly gave up one and chose one of the plates. When we got home and she saw the other one that I bought for her eyes lit up with joy. I would never see again the cute little expression on her face when she was hesitating over a plate or a bowl. And I no longer had the chance to taste the new dishes she cooked. Occasionally, I opened Irene's videos and cooked for myself following her example. She held a plate and faced the camera, only her voice could be heard. Everyone, please pay attention. Cut the meat like this, and it will look better when cooked. I had some impression of that video. At that time, I almost barged into her shot and she was kicking me with her feet under the table. The more I teased her, the more anxious she became. After the live broadcast ended, she was so angry that she made me eat the burnt meat. The deeper the night when I couldn't sleep, the more frequently I thought of her. Many details from the past became clearer and clearer during countless sleepless nights. The red mole on her palm, her burning ears when she was shy, and her shy smile. She kissed my eyes and said, Richard, your eyes are so beautiful. I missed her so much that I almost went crazy, but I never heard from her. Until Xiaoyu sent me an address. I accidentally saw her in a classmates group photo. Irene is studying in the United States and lives here. I was so excited that I immediately bought a plane ticket and flew to the United States. The more than 10 hours on the plane were torture for me every minute and every second. I was thinking about what I should say when I saw her. Irene, I miss you so much. Irene, could you please forgive me one more time? Irene, I'm sorry. Many words went through my mind again and again, but none of them could come out of my mouth. When I arrived at her address, it was on a sunny afternoon. Irene happened to be walking out of the house. She was wearing a very beautiful white dress, with her hair tied up, looking gentle and beautiful. She was riding a pink bicycle, coming out of the garden and wandering back and forth on the path. I wanted to go over, but my feet seemed to be filled with lead. I wanted to call her name, but my throat seemed to be stuck. Looking at myself in the car window beside me, I saw that I was unshaven, my clothes were wrinkled, my face was haggard, and my eyes were tired. I immediately panicked and fled back to the hotel to tidy up my appearance. I was afraid that Irene would be disappointed when she saw me like this. I spent 2 days adjusting my state before I dared to go to see her. On the way, I bought her favorite gardenias. I waited at the door at 7 o'clock in the morning. After hesitating for a long time, I finally summoned up the courage to knock on the door. Soon someone came to open the door. The person who opened the door was a strange man. He was wearing a black nightgown and holding a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked refined and gentle, with a pair of very beautiful eyes. He was a bit surprised to see me and then he frowned slightly. She's still sleeping. Please wait in the living room for a while. He welcomed me in. I walked in mechanically, feeling numb all over and a bitter taste on my tongue. The living room was bright and comfortable. The sofa was brown, which Irene liked, and there was a knitted blanket thrown on it. Judging from the clumsy pattern, I knew it was knitted by Irene herself. She was not good at knitting, but she liked to try. In the open kitchen, there was a big cupboard with all kinds of tableware in it. On the cabinet by the door, there were many small dolls. Irene always liked to buy such small things. On the coffee table, there were a pair of couple cups. Probably made by themselves, they had a strange shape. The handles of the two cups could actually be hooked together. One cup had the letter S written on it, and the other had the letter Q. I recognized that they were the letters written by Irene. When she wrote Q, the tail would always curl up. Coffee or tea? The man asked me. Tea? I said. He made a cup of tea for me. I just smelled it and knew it was the fruit tea made by Irene. When I was busy, I always forgot to drink water, so Irene specially made a lot of fruit tea for me, which was good for clearing the mind and improving eyesight. He sat down opposite me and sipped his coffee slowly. It might take a while longer. He looked at his watch and said, she'll probably sleep until 8:30. I noticed that his collar was open and there was a red mark on his collarbone. He noticed my gaze and casually adjusted his collar. Minute by minute, I felt like I was being fried in a hot oil pan. I could only keep looking around the house to relieve the pain of waiting. The scattered jigsaw puzzle pieces by the window, I could tell at a glance that it was the 1,000-piece Sunflowers by Van Gogh. Irene had never finished it before. She was a very persistent person and now she had started to work on it again. There were fresh gardenias in the vase which made the bunch I bought seem redundant. Perhaps it wasn't just my flowers that were redundant. A cat suddenly jumped out from somewhere. It crouched on the flower stand and looked at me curiously. Fan. I recognized it at a glance and called out its name. I wanted to go over and hug it, but it jumped away at once. It's not Fan. It's Tong, Fon's sister. The man opposite explained lazily. Another cat jumped out and meowed at me. I mistook it for Fan, but Fan didn't mistake me. When it saw me, it walked around me and then jumped into the arms of the man opposite. Go away. You'll leave hair all over me. How can I hug your mom later? The man pushed it away with a bit of disgust. Fan whined pitifully and ran away with the other cat. After a while, Irene's voice came from upstairs. Her voice was as gentle as always. Ethan, did you bully Fan again? It's complaining to me. Suddenly, I felt like I was on fire all over. I got up and left. I couldn't see her. How could I see her? I rushed out and stood on the empty street gasping for breath. In that house, Irene's presence was everywhere, but I didn't dare to breathe. Soon, I heard Irene calling me. Richard. I turned my head to look at her. She was holding Fan and standing on the steps, smiling at me. You're here. Let's have breakfast together. I saw the cup and the flowers on the table and realized that there were guests. Richard is here, Ethan said, raising his eyebrows. I thought I had misheard and asked, Richard. That name seemed to come from a distant time. I hadn't thought of this name for a long time. Ethan walked over, took out a pair of socks and put them on for me, then pinched my ankle. Yes, you heard right. He's here. Ethan held my hand and walked downstairs with me. He left when he heard your voice. I thought for a moment and said, he probably hasn't left yet. I'll go out and have a look. Ethan raised his eyebrows even higher. I kissed his eyes and said with a smile, Dr. Ethan, there's still one important thing left between Richard and me. Sure enough, Richard hadn't left. He was standing under a big tree by the door. He had lost a lot of weight, and his eyes were a bit moist when he looked at me. Richard, as if out of control, rushed over and hugged me tightly. I gently patted his back and said with a smile, Richard, long time no see. Come in and sit for a while. He let go of me, turned his back to me, and calmed down for a long time. Ethan was making breakfast, and Richard and I sat in the living room for a while. The flowers are beautiful. Thank you. I found an idle vase and put the flowers in it. I said a bit apologetically, I'm sorry. I've been busy taking care of my health these years and haven't gone back to China to get the divorce certificate with you. Did it delay your marriage with Xiao Yu? I wasn't with Xiao Yu, not before, and not later either. Richard's voice was very hoarse. I was quite surprised, but I didn't ask more. Oh, is that so? Suddenly, Richard seemed to break down. Irene, when you were having the operation in the hospital, you clearly saw me. Why didn't you call out to me? When you saw me with Xiao Yu from the camera at home, why didn't you go back and question me? His intense emotion startled me. Ethan walked over and said with an unpleasant look on his face, Richard, if you talk to her in such an attitude, then please leave and we can talk at another time. Could you leave for a while, please? I took Ethan's hand and shook it. He snorted softly, remember to drink your milk. After Ethan left, I took a few tissues and handed them to Richard. Richard's eyes were red, and he begged me, Irene, can you come back? I took a few sips of milk to relieve the pressure in my stomach. Richard, since the day you went to see Xiao Yu without telling me, many things have been irreversible. I'm not good at competing for things. When you were by Xiao Yu's side accompanying her, I went to the hospital alone for examinations. I found out that I was pregnant and then was diagnosed with stomach cancer. At that time, holding the test report, sitting in the crowded hall, I was really scared. I sent you a message, but you didn't reply. Xiao Yu sent me a video, and at that time, you were making porridge to coax her to drink it. Later, I packed my luggage alone and went to the hospital. Worried that Fanfan would be in trouble, I asked an aunt to come to feed it and also installed a surveillance camera. That camera wasn't installed deliberately to monitor you. You asked me why I didn't question you. When I got to this point, I thought for a moment and then said softly, because it didn't matter anymore. Richard, from the moment I decided not to love you anymore, many things didn't matter anymore. Richard's eyes were full of sadness. Irene, I don't have a chance anymore, do I? This time, you won't forgive me anymore. I just looked at him quietly and didn't say anything. The last time I saw Richard was in the winter after I returned to China. He was terribly thin, wearing a thin overcoat, looking haggard. Irene, it turns out that having a stomachache is so painful. He showed me a bitter smile and said, I can't eat, I vomit blood. When I go to the hospital alone, the noisy crowd makes me feel even sadder. When you spent those days in the hospital alone, it must have been so hard. I went to the hospital yesterday and visited the obstetrics and gynecology department. There was a girl who had just had an abortion operation crying bitterly in the corridor, and some others walked out with pale faces and empty eyes. You've gone through so much alone. I thought for a moment and said, it's okay. Dr. Ethan has been with me all the time, so I didn't suffer too much. Getting the divorce certificate was quick. Just 2 stamps, and the 2 people who used to be so close had nothing to do with each other anymore. The clothes I'm wearing today are the ones I wore when we got the marriage certificate, Richard suddenly said, holding the certificate. I was a bit surprised. Really? Richard paused for a moment before saying, in the past, you remembered everything about me very clearly. I didn't know how to respond to this. Since I made up my mind not to love Richard anymore, many memories about him had gradually become blurred. A person's heart is really small and can only hold one person. An ordinary vase can hold extra flowers, but there's no spare space in the heart to love another person. He was really too thin, and I couldn't help saying, take good care of yourself. He smiled and said, okay. That was the last time I saw Richard. Later, I saw Xiao Yu's moments. She had changed her profile picture to a black one. I thought about it but still didn't ask her, Foodie. This vase is Mom's favorite. Don't you know that? Ethan was scolding Fanfan and Tong Tong again. The 2 troublemakers had smashed the vase and were meowing, waiting for me to save them. I sighed and went to deal with the situation. Life always goes on. I used to think that I was a very unlucky man. During the years of studying medicine, I was so busy that I was constantly on the run. When I looked back, I found myself all alone. Even the little dogs on the roadside had companions. The year my father passed away, my mother almost became depressed. All kinds of pressures came one after another and I almost became depressed too. Sometimes a person's nerves are so strong that they can bear the weight of a huge mountain and sometimes just a tiny straw can break them. The straw that broke me was a patient who died on the operating table. Every doctor knows that in their career they will always encounter such things. All surgeries have risks. Shortly after coming out of the operating room, I received a call from my mother. My father was gone. I sat there for a long time and couldn't come to my senses. My father was a literati and had dealt with words all his life. He was an extremely refined and gentle man. Great virtue is like water. These 4 words could exactly describe him. My mother was always chattering non-stop. As for me, I had a hot temper. Only my father was always calm and gentle, following behind us too. Honey, don't rush. Son, take your time. He got cancer and passed away. I couldn't save the patient nor could I cure him. After my father passed away, my mother became addicted to making some horrible dishes. When I found large amounts of money flowing out of our bank account, I almost thought she had been cheated. Later, I found out that she was addicted to watching a food live streamer cooking. Don't rush. Take your time when cutting this. Be careful not to cut your hand. Slow work yields fine products. Cooking can't be rushed. Her voice flowed gently and softly from the phone. I listened and forgot about time. When I looked up, I saw my mother crying while holding her phone. Later, every Friday night we would sit in the living room and watch her live stream. Well, the soup needs to be stewed for a while. We can chat. What do I do when I'm unhappy? I'll find a very quiet place and sit quietly. I don't lose my temper easily. I seldom get angry. She chatted, said a few words when she had something to say, and hummed a song when she didn't. Those sleepless nights suddenly had a cure. Only by listening to her voice could I fall asleep peacefully. My mother became familiar with her and always called her daughter. Alas, it's a pity that my dear daughter has a husband. Yes, she had her own family. Ethan, was really an unlucky man. During her live stream, she accidentally mentioned that she had always wanted to raise a cat since she was a child. Before I realized it, there were already 2 kittens at home. My mother almost kicked me out of the 15th floor. She still contacted Irene and sent the kittens to her. My mother kept it from me and didn't tell me Irene's address for fear that I would go crazy and look for her. When Irene started her live stream again, she said very seriously, "Thank you, Auntie who always messes up in the kitchen. I really like Fan. I will definitely take good care of it." So, the one meowing beside my feet got its name, Tong Tong. My mother rolled her eyes and sneered, "Foodie." I was on a business trip when Jack sent me a medical record, saying that there was a patient who wanted me to have a look. I recognized her name, Irene. When I rushed back, she was lying on the hospital bed. She was wearing a blue hospital gown, with her hair loose. She was gentle and beautiful, and her eyes were like spring water. She was talking to Shall We, and her voice was soft, exactly the same as in the videos. I took a look at her palm and sure enough, there was a red mole. Irene came to the hospital alone for an abortion operation and also ran into her husband and his lover. There were problems in her marriage. I thought to myself, Ethan, you're actually a bit lucky. Then I thought again, I'd rather not have this kind of luck. I had been paying attention to her for 4 years. I knew that she had an avoidant personality. For some things, if you didn't put them bluntly, she would never take the initiative to say them. That night after the operation, she fell asleep, and I accompanied her in the ward. Actually, she woke up in a daze in the middle of the night and wanted to drink water. It was me who fed her. She wasn't really conscious. For 4 years, I had been dreaming about what this woman looked like. Now that I saw her, I couldn't bear to take my eyes off her. Shall We, that chatterbox, probed me. "Dr. Ethan, I think Sister Irene in Ward 302 is so beautiful and gentle. If I were a man, I would definitely like her." I told Shall We, coincidentally, I am a man. Shall We immediately covered her mouth and made a shrieking sound like a chicken. The next day, it spread all over the hospital that the 7th greatest unsolved mystery in the world finally had an answer. The orientation of the supposedly sexless Dr. Ethan was determined. He liked women. He liked that gentle and beautiful young lady in Ward 302. Well, that's good. Those words reached Irene's ears. When I talked to her, her ears were so red that they seemed to be on fire. I vaguely remember that once during her live stream, she suddenly disappeared for a while. When she came back, her lips were a bit darker in color, and her ears were burning hot. I really wanted to explain to her that I'm not frigid, but I couldn't say that. It would sound too much like being a hooligan. Misley rushed into the hospital in a hurry, hugged her precious daughter, and burst into tears, which scared Irene a lot. She said, "Ethan, you disobedient son. Irene has suffered so much. If you dare to bully her by any means, don't blame me for cutting off the mother-son relationship with you." I bullied Irene? How could I? She blushes whenever we talk a few words, which makes me forget what I was going to say. Before, when I watched her live stream and listened to her voice to fall asleep, I thought in my heart that she must be a woman worthy of love. Until I met her, I became even more certain of one thing. She is a woman who is very, very worthy of love. She would be so scared that she shed tears, crying and saying, "Dr. Ethan, I'm so scared." But she's also very strong. When watching the video of her husband kissing his lover, she had a calm expression. At that time, an idea popped into my head. I must never cheat and never do anything to be sorry to Irene. Otherwise, if she didn't love me one day, this world would be like hell. Dream on. If my daughter likes a disobedient son like you, then the Ethan family's ancestors must have accumulated a lot of good deeds and burned a lot of incense. Misley poured cold water on me. When Irene agreed to go abroad with me, Misley went to burn incense overnight and also went to pay respects to my father. By the way, the ancestors have accumulated good deeds. Truly. This disobedient son Ethan has finally done a good thing. She was so excited that she didn't sleep all night and even thought of the names for our grandchildren. Irene is a woman like the spring breeze. Wherever she goes, she brings warmth and everything seems green and fresh. Flowers seem to bloom all over my heart. When she was studying at school, I went to pick her up. Irene was sitting on the grass, looking through a book. A leaf fell on her hair. She picked it up, looked at it, and put it into the book. "Are you using it as a bookmark?" I walked over and asked her. Irene said seriously, "Dr. Ethan, I've picked up your book of fate." She had been watching a TV series recently where leaves were regarded as the book of fate. "Please, Lord of Fate, tell me where my marriage fate lies." I asked her with a smile. Irene handed the book to me and also started to laugh. "It's in your hands." She always has such lovely moments. Later, Irene asked me a question. She said, "Dr. Ethan, you fell in love with me after hearing my voice. What if you were disappointed and didn't like me anymore after seeing me and finding that I'm not good looking?" Jack had asked me this question before. He thought it was ridiculous that I was infatuated with a food anchor who had never shown her face. He said, "Old Ethan, what if your Irene is like Chow Biluo? What would you do?" I searched for Chow Biluo and was silent for a long time. I also tried to stop liking you, but I couldn't even sleep well. I told Irene, at that time, I had no hope at all, so I just let myself go. The ancestors' graves must have smoked. Fate brought you to my side. I like you, and you happen to be very beautiful. This is God's favor on me, Ethan. Irene blinked her eyes and the roots of her ears turned red again. And that night, we had a daughter. Time passed neither too fast nor too slow. She has been by my side for many years. She has become my girlfriend, the owner of Fan Tong, the cats, my wife, and the mother of our daughter. I, Ethan, am truly an extremely lucky man. Ms. Lee, the Ethan family's ancestors' graves must have really smoked, or maybe old Ethan pulled some strings down there. Ethan, you're so happy that you're bubbling over. The man who is loved by Irene is the luckiest and happiest man in the world. The end.